Take a look at this. This was marketed as a legitimate solution for changing the shape of your body. And these were worn despite the fact that they made walking incredibly unstable and dangerous. And things like this were designed to physically reshape the face. People didn't just try these, they swore by them, used them consistently, spent money on them, and were convinced they were working. Sound familiar? Maybe just a little uncomfortable. All right, at first glance, it's easy to look at this and think, people back then just didn't know any better. But that's not really what was happening here. They weren't stupid decisions. They were logical and based on what people understood at the time and what they were being told. And that's where this gets really interesting, because when you start to look at why people believed in these things, the pattern starts to feel a little less historical and a little more familiar. So instead of just looking at what these were, I want to also point out that these weren't random ideas. They followed very specific patterns and had intuitive reasoning behind their development. And the first category in this historical health trip are wearable solutions. And this first one has been around for centuries. All right, women wore corsets designed to compress the waist, sometimes to extreme degrees. And over time, this wasn't just fashion, it became expectation. The tighter the waist, the more it signaled control, discipline, even status. So fast forward today, and the idea hasn't really changed. Now we just call them waist trainers, with the likes of Kim K and others assigning their tiny waist to them. And just like before, they can create a temporary change, but underneath that, nothing's really happening. The body hasn't actually changed. Different centuries, same strategy. Once the goal becomes transformation, though, well, that's where things can tend to escalate. Now, we've also been trying to reshape the face for a long time. Early methods used straps, pressure, even rigid devices meant to guide the structure over time, which already sounds ambitious. But today, that same idea shows up in things like jaw trainers. You chew on this, build the masseter and temporalis muscles, change the shape of your face, supposedly, allegedly. To be fair, you can strengthen these muscles, but it's not the same as changing your bone structure. Because if you think about it, all right, if that worked, people who chew gum all day would be walking around with Henry Cavill's jawline. And that's not what's happening, unfortunately. What you're really getting is a subtle muscle change at best, mixed with the very convincing feeling that you're actively doing something. Effort tends to make things feel more legitimate, even when the outcome is pretty minimal. So it's less about actually reshaping the face and more about creating the sense that you're working toward it. And that idea has been around for a very long time. And then there is height. Historically, there were shoes like these, extremely elevated, unstable, and, well, dangerous. But they weren't worn despite this. They were worn because of it, what they signaled. Some of them reached heights of 20 inches or more, which means at a certain point, you're not really walking anymore. You're being elevated on a piece of furniture, right? In places like Venice, women often needed assistance just to move around in these, understandably. Not because they were incapable, but because the design made independence inadvisable, let's just say. And that was part of the appeal, because the height wasn't random. It signaled status. And how, you might ask? The taller the shoe, the more it said that you didn't need to move quickly, didn't need to navigate life easily. You had help for that, darling. So the limitation became the feature. It changed how you moved. Shorter steps, slower pace, more controlled posture, almost staged, not unlike what we see today still. Now, fast forward, the Chopines are gone, but the idea didn't go away. And yes, they're called Chopines or Chopines. I don't know. But anyway, they didn't really go anywhere. We just refined them a little bit. Enter high heels. They lift the body, shift the weight forward, tilt the pelvis, change the curvature of the spine. Basically, reorganize your entire posture in a way that emphasizes certain features, all in the span of a 3 to 6 inch heel. Legs look longer, calves more defined, the body moves differently, more deliberate, more controlled. There's a reason models don't just walk in heels, they train for it. Because it's not a natural gait, it's a learned one, at times with poor outcomes. And here's where it gets really interesting. At a certain point, discomfort stopped being a downside and started becoming part of the design. Yeah, a feature, if you will. And anyone who's worn one of these knows exactly what I'm talking about, because if something is difficult to wear, it requires practice, it limits how you move, it starts to carry a different kind of message: control, discipline, effort, other assumptions. And for some reason, we find that intriguing. Case in point, allegedly, Christian Louboutin designed his famous red-bottom stilettos to mimic the arch of a woman's foot when she's in the throes of, you can, guess. You can figure it out. Picture it. Got it? And if you did, drop it in the comments. But then things can really escalate here. And when you zoom out, you start to see a pattern. And it often begins with something external and temporary. But if the desired result is strong enough, people just don't always stop there. There have been cases, rare but real, where people have gone as far as surgically removing ribs to create a smaller waist. And I don't know how rare this is. I'm going to say in today's day and age, maybe not so much anymore. I don't know. But at that point, you're not just shaping the body, you're changing it permanently. So whether it's something you wear, something you tighten, or something you commit to long-term, the idea is the same. So if wearable solutions are about changing the body from the outside, the next category is about fixing it from the inside. And this is where things start to get a little more complicated. Because historically, this is where you start to see the snake oil, tonics, elixirs, powders, things people were told could restore balance, boost energy, and fix the vaguest of symptoms. And to be fair, some of these weren't completely misguided, and they were often used based on whatever understanding existed at the time, which just wasn't always great. Now, in the 1800s, you could pretty much walk into any pharmacy and buy tonics that contain things like arsenic. Not by accident either, on purpose. And this one is kind of wild. We tend to think of arsenic as strictly poison nowadays, which it is. But in the Victorian era, it was also a beauty product. Of course it was. Of course it was. Women were literally taking what they called complexion wafers, which were small doses of arsenic that they would ingest daily to achieve that pale, smooth, porcelain skin that was considered the ideal at the time. And here's the uncomfortable part. It actually worked, at least in the short term. Arsenic can suppress certain skin conditions and inflammation, so the skin could appear clearer, more refined, and almost luminous. Meanwhile, it's quietly accumulating in the body and doing what arsenic does best, destroying organs. It didn't stop there either. It also showed up in face powders, creams, soaps, all marketed to improve complexion, reduce blemishes, and create that delicate, almost translucent look. So, while women were tightening their corsets to reshape their bodies, they were also quite literally absorbing poison through their skin in the name of beauty. And nobody at the time is thinking, this feels unsafe. They're thinking, oh my God, Winifred, this is working! And then because that apparently wasn't enough, arsenic also made its way into medicine. There was something called Fowler's solution containing potassium arsenite that physicians actually prescribed for conditions like rheumatism, psoriasis, and asthma. It was taken orally like a daily health supplement. There were even groups of people, particularly in parts of Austria, known as Arsenic Eaters, who had built up tolerance to small doses and believed it improved their stamina, breathing, and overall vitality. The logic was that if your body could handle poison, it must be getting stronger, which is a bold interpretation. And arsenic wasn't just in products you chose, it was also in the environment, because it was used in bright green pigments for wallpaper and clothing, and in damp conditions, it could release toxic gases into the home. So you could be sitting in your beautifully decorated living room feeling like you've really elevated your space, while the walls themselves are slowly poisoning you. Now, they didn't know any better. They were chasing the same thing people chase now: clear skin, youth, energy, status. Arsenic just happened to be one of the tools that delivered visible results quickly enough to keep people hooked. But mercury was another favorite. Yeah, used for infections, skin issues, famously for syphilis. There was even a saying at the time, something along the lines of one night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. Yeah. Which sounds poetic until you realize mercury exposure causes tremors, mood changes, neurological damage, saying mad as a hatter, also due to mercury poisoning. So yes, the treatment was a little misguided. And then there were cure-all tonics. These were sold as solutions for everything: fatigue, digestion, nerves, vague female complaints. Some contained alcohol, some contained opiates, some just tasted strong enough to convince you something important was happening. Which, to be fair, if you take something and immediately feel different, well, it's easy to assume it's working, but it's not always the same thing. And that's kind of the pattern. You take something, you feel something, and your brain goes, oh, I'll connect these dots for you perfectly, very efficiently. But now let's fast forward. And this is where I'm not going to pretend everything in this category is complete nonsense, because it's not. Modern medicine has treatments that are incredibly effective nowadays. Some supplements do have real measurable benefit, and some just turn out to be very expensive nothing. But the structure of how these things are marketed hasn't changed all that much. You see, we still see products that promise to boost, support, enhance, optimize, which all sound impressive until you realize that they're doing a lot of heavy lifting without saying anything truly specific. And sometimes the claims get really ambitious: better energy, better focus, better skin, better metabolism, occasionally all in the same bottle, which is impressive if it were true. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And that's where it gets kind of messy, because the real issue isn't that these things exist. It's how quickly we start to assume they're doing more than they actually are. And at some point, everything starts to sound like it's one capsule away from fixing your life, which would be incredible and extremely efficient. And just like before, this isn't really about people being naive. It's about people wanting a solution that feels manageable, something you can take or you can stick with, and something that feels like progress without dismantling your entire life. And that idea, that's been around for a very long time. And then there's the third and final category, the surface level fixes. These are things that you apply with the promise that something visible is going to change. Now, this is probably the easiest category to believe in because it feels simple. You put something on, you expect to see something happen. I do this with my own skincare today. I put cream on, I expect to see changes. There were creams marketed for things like enlarging the bust, enhancing features, improving skin in ways that were just kind of irrational. And no real regulation either. There was no standard, just confident claims and good packaging. And people used them regularly. Some of these products caused irritation, swelling, temporary changes that could easily be mistaken for progress. Because if you see something happening, you're a lot less likely to question it. And that pattern, again, has not changed much. Now we just have better branding, better lighting, and better before and afters. So whether it's something you wear or something you take or something you tighten, or something you apply, you start to see the same patterns over and over again. We all still want results, we still want control, and we're still drawn to anything that promises both. All right, that's where I'm going to leave this one. And if you made it this far, I'm really curious what you think, because this topic can go in a lot of different directions. And I always love hearing your take on things. And if you found this helpful or interesting, you can support the channel by liking the video or subscribing or sharing it with somebody who might appreciate it. Every little bit goes a long way. And if you're looking for support beyond YouTube, I offer one-on-one calls where we can go through your specific situation, whether that's neuropathy or other symptoms you're trying to make sense of, or just needing a clearer plan on. And you can book that directly through my website at lucidmedhub.com. I also have a few downloadable guides on there, including my neuropathy flare protocol and other tools that I use regularly. Those are available on the hub as well. All right, thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay healthy and lucid.